Subtitles by Dimatorzok.
Subtitles by Dimatorzok. Confrontation, as some Kurdish groups have resorted to armed seizure of power in certain cities. But besides that, the protests in Iran risk escalating into a larger geopolitical war. The regime of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in Iran has declared the protesters terrorists and called for a total crackdown on those who oppose the regime. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei himself stated that the authorities will not back down and are ready to eliminate all protesters. At the same time, the son, Subtitris Delal Dimatorzok, decided to lead the protest and called on participants in the mass protests in the country to move towards seizing power. And he announced his readiness to return to his homeland to lead, as he put it, the national revolution. At the same time, United States President Donald Trump called on the Iranian regime to calm down. Otherwise, the United States would enter a new phase of war against Iran. But then suddenly China enters the stage. Subtitles by Dimatorzok. And today, Iran, China, and Russia suddenly announced joint naval military exercises. What is happening in Iran today? What are the chances of overthrowing the Ayatollah regime? What role does Reza Pahlavi play in the protests? And is a confrontation between the United States and China possible because of the regime in Iran? We will discuss all of this in this episode. And now, Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this together and dive into the topic. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and leave a comment. Subtitles by Dimatorzok. Subtitles by Dimatorzok.
Subtitles by Dimatorzok.
Subtitles by Dimatorzok. Subtitles by DIMA.
So, the main news that is turning the protests in Iran upside down is that China has unexpectedly announced that it is ready to fight for the Ayatollah regime in Tehran. The day before, the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, said, and I quote, "I am addressing the Iranian leaders. You better not start shooting, because we will start shooting too." And in response to this statement, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China unexpectedly made a loud announcement, and I quote, "China will not sit idly by while the sovereignty of the great Iranian nation is violated by bandits and criminals supported from outside. Whatever the Iranian government needs in terms of financial, technical, intelligence, or military assistance, China is ready to provide it." And this is where it gets really interesting, because for China, this is a truly serious statement. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs essentially labeled the protesting Kurds as bandits and criminals, likely referring to the most active ones. Chinese media echo the Iranian ones and claim that supposedly the United States and Israel are supporting the Kurds in their protests. All the protests are mainly due to the Americans, not the country's poor economy. Trump is threatening more strikes. China is ready to help Iran, and all of this looks like a risk of direct confrontation with China. But let's go through everything step by step here. The largest mass protests against Iranian authorities in 3 years have continued for 2 weeks. And so, on Friday night, people once again took to the streets of Tehran and other cities. Despite a complete internet shutdown and harsh actions by security forces, officially about 50 protesters and 15 security personnel have already been killed, and more than 2,300 people have been arrested. An increasing number of those admitted to hospitals have gunshot wounds to the head and eyes. And it seems that the Iranian authorities are ready to move on to even greater repression. In particular, Tehran prosecutor Ali Salehi threatened protesters with the death penalty, calling them terrorists. According to him, those involved in property damage or using weapons against law enforcement will be prosecuted under the article of rebellion against the state. And now I will quote him. The red line for the judicial system is the safety of the country's citizens. Our approach to terrorists will be deterrent, and the sentence for them will be a sentence for rebellion against the state. According to Iran's criminal law, rebellion against the state can be punishable by death. I would like to note that earlier, on January 9, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in a televised address, blamed the protests on, quote, a handful of vandals who are trying to please the President of the United States of America, and stated that the authorities will not back down. Well, Khamenei also threatened to overthrow Donald Trump, but here we will still focus on the internal situation in Iran. Iranian state television in turn reported that armed individuals, in order to spread panic, began shooting at protesters and civilians from the rooftops of buildings, hinting that some third force has appeared, provoking both sides. In one of the previous episodes on this YouTube channel, I emphasized that the first cities captured by the protesters were precisely on the border with Iraq, and not by accident. It's important to note here that against the backdrop of the protests, Kurdish groups, specifically groups of Kurds, created so-called assault squads to fight against the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. In Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan, real armed clashes are taking place, and the authorities are using live ammunition. But now there are also armed people on the side of the protesters, and the Kurds are creating these assault squads who have firearms in their hands. And now why? I said that it's very important that the most active protests started right on the border with Iraq, but I should note right away that the protest actually began in Tehran. Look at the map. This map shows the places where Kurds live in the Middle East. As you can see, Kurds are concentrated in the border regions of Iran and Iraq. If we talk about these two countries, you'll see that they are concentrated right along the border. And on the second map, you can see the main cities in Iran where protests are happening. It turns out that the core of the protest movement is the Kurds, so it matches up here. But it would be a mistake to claim that the unrest in Iran is mainly ethnic in nature. It's not just the Kurds protesting the Ayatollah regime. That would be a mistake because the current protest didn't start with the Kurds, but with Tehran, where merchants began the first protest on December 28. It was the ordinary merchants and sellers who started this protest, and within a few days, economic slogans turned into political ones. Only then did the Kurds join. However, the hostility between the Kurds and the Shiite Ayatollahs goes back a long way. The Kurdish uprising of 1979 was brutally suppressed, and with it, the hope for the creation of a Kurdish autonomy in Iran was crushed. Nevertheless, over the past half-century, periodic uprisings of the Kurdish population have occurred in Iran. But the situation has never reached such a level of tension before. This is the first time since the 1979 revolution that things have become this intense. And it's important that this is no longer just a war between the Kurds and the Ayatollah regime. The Kurds are now part of the protest, so it's quite clear that this is not simply a confrontation between the Kurdish population and the Shiite regime of the Ayatollahs. No, this is generally a protest of the Iranian people, which also includes the Kurds. But it is beneficial for Iran, China, and Russia to focus attention specifically on the Kurds, thereby downplaying the real reason for the protest. The Ayatollah regime now claims the Kurds serve United States and Israeli interests, because the Kurds are probably the closest allies of the United States in the Middle East region. But in recent years, Kurdish groups have gained their own money, their own power, money from the export, by the way, of Syrian and Iraqi oil from the territories under their control. And overall, Iraqi Kurdistan, the main political and geographical entity of the Kurds, is rich in oil. Officially, there are about 45 billion barrels of oil there. Those reserves are really significant. So this is already a separate force that can dictate its own terms. But again, the root cause of the current protests in Iran is the economic situation, because inflation is breaking all records. Let me remind you, one United States dollar is worth 1.5 million Iranian rials, which looks absolutely insane. Over the past year, prices have risen by 75%, medicines by 50%, and overall, the economy is simply falling apart at the seams. There's also corruption and more issues. Iranians complain that there are a lot of officials who are simply making money off the sanctions, saying there are Western sanctions. There are schemes and loopholes to trade the same oil and bypass sanctions using gray methods. They take the money out, and this money ends up in the pockets of officials, not in the state budget. And the Kurds themselves, let me remind you, did not join the protest from the very first days. Amid instability in Iran, Russian military transport aircraft showed unusual activity, according to Air Cargo Week. From December 27, 2025 to January 1, 2026, Il-76 aircraft disguised as civilian planes regularly flew from Russian Mineralny Vody to Tehran, avoiding NATO airspace. The publication states the flights are more like military logistics than commercial transport. Moreover, later information emerged that Russian planes were transporting weapons and ammunition to Tehran for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And on the way back to Moscow, they are transporting significant amounts of gold. This may indicate that the Iranian leadership is preparing for life after the fall of the regime. According to Western intelligence, KHMNI has developed an evacuation plan from Tehran to Moscow. And against this backdrop, the protest in Iran has finally found a leader. The son of the deposed Shah, the son of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, has called on participants in the mass protests in Iran to move towards seizing power and announced his readiness to return to his homeland to lead the national revolution. Here is his quote: "I am confident that by increasing our presence in the streets and at the same time cutting off financial arteries, we will completely bring the Islamic Republic and its worn-out and fragile apparatus of repression to its knees." Next, Pahlavi called on workers in key sectors such as transportation, oil, gas, and energy to start a general strike, and urged all citizens to take to the streets with national symbols to occupy and hold the central areas of the cities. Pahlavi also addressed the security forces, urging them to sabotage the actions of the repressive machine. Another quote: "I am preparing to return to my homeland to be with you, the great people of Iran, during the victory of our national revolution. I believe that this day is very near." Let me also remind you that earlier Pahlavi appealed to United States President Donald Trump, urging him to intervene in the situation and support the demonstrators. But honestly, there are questions about whether the Iranian people are truly ready to accept him as a leader. Some of the protesters really did come out even with portraits of Pahlavi and said that he is their leader, but on the other hand, it should be noted that Reza Pahlavi left Iran during the Islamic Revolution of 1979. And if I'm not mistaken, at that time he was 16 years old or so. And all the time since then he has been outside of Iran. Now he is well into his 60s. Obviously he hasn't been in the country for a long time, and it's not certain that the Iranian people are ready to accept him as a leader. Meanwhile, Iran is being accused in the United States of America of inciting unrest, and here again there is a reference to the Kurds. Iran's permanent United Nations representative wrote to the Security Council, stating that Washington is interfering in Iran's internal affairs through threats, incitement, and encouraging instability and violence. A representative of the United States State Department called the claim of American interference absurd. United States President Donald Trump, who bombed Iranian nuclear facilities in June, once again threatened on Friday to order new strikes if the Iranian authorities kill protesters. He added that United States involvement does not mean the deployment of ground troops, and this is where China and Russia step into the situation. What's happening? First, China made a statement that Beijing is ready to provide military assistance to the regime of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And on the same day, Russia, China, and Iran began a joint Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus military exercise near the coast of the Republic of South Africa. And here's how Russians are commenting on this. The week-long naval exercises will focus on practicing to ensure safe navigation and protect economic activity at sea. Countries that have expressed a desire to reduce their dependence on the United States and other Western economies have joined Russia, China, and Iran. Kitai's involvement here is especially important. Kitai is now losing influence not just in Iran but throughout the Middle East. If the regime in Iran collapses, Kitai will have, so to speak, no people of its own left in the region at all. The thing is, 10 years after Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates led a joint military campaign to limit Iran's influence in Yemen, these two allies now find themselves facing off against each other there. Yemen faces a struggle between pro-Emirati and pro-Saudi forces, with Saudi Arabia prevailing. Saudi Arabia has already achieved success, after which some of the forces controlled by the Emirates agreed to come under the protection of Saudi Arabia. And I have a separate episode on this topic on my YouTube channel, which I highly recommend you watch. If you haven't seen it, you can pause, go find that episode and watch it. This is crucial for understanding the context. In short, the forces supported by Saudi Arabia in Yemen, after suppressing the separatists backed by the Emirates, will move on to suppress the Houthis, who are supported by Iran. And these forces are not hiding it. And China is involved in all of this. The thing is, in 2023, China very proudly acted as a mediator in normalizing relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, precisely in the hope that Saudi Arabia would not start imposing order in Yemen, thus leaving Iran's sphere of influence in this part of the Middle East. But now, this deal brokered by China basically means nothing. And the Saudis are aiming for the gradual displacement, the displacement of Iranian interests from this part of the Middle East. So now it looks like the Iranian protest could turn into something bigger. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel financially with your donation or paid subscription using the links and details in. It says right there under this video, support the Alexei Pechi channel. Choose any format that's convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.